morning, good evening, from wherever you are. Welcome to this next line of our series of webinars on ESCOs. And this webinar will revolve around regulatory barriers for ESCOs, which is basically based on the results of our analysis, our second analysis on the topic. The previous one was from last year, and there's been some changes. First of all, thank you to all the associations that have contributed to the analysis and have responded to our many questions regarding the regulatory barriers that they meet in their jurisdictions and identifying potential solutions. I also take this opportunity to remind you and invite you to our next webinar, which will be about ESCOs in India, beyond cherry picking, where we will examine public policies and regulations at the national and subnational level, where we have an expert, Ms. Arti Nain, which has been an advisor at UNEP's India Urban Cooling Program, and she will give her insights on India's ESCOs and some practical examples as well. You're, of course, welcome to visit our website, look at webinar, register, share the registration link with your ESCO members or any other interested parties in your network. So the presentation will start off by basically going through the results of this year analysis on the regulatory barriers for ESCOs, and then we are so lucky to have Dr. Timothy Unruh, which is the Executive Director of NIESCO, the National Association of Energy Service Companies in the United States, and he will present on the regulatory barriers that they have faced in their markets and potential solutions, and also the scope of the ESCO Association in finding these solutions. So, with that said, and with that introduction, I'll take you through the results of this year's analysis. I will make the presentation, and there will be time for questions and answers after Timothy's presentation. So if you have any questions while we present, you're more than welcome to write these questions down in the menu, and we'll try to address most of or all of them, ideally, by the end of this webinar. Also, we see a lot of requests for the recordings to the webinars. Rest assured that if you have registered, you will be receiving a link with the recordings to the webinar and presentations and so forth. So that will come usually around a week or so after the webinar. So this year's analysis, we expanded the reach. We had fewer associations that we managed to analyze and their jurisdictions. This year we had 18 associations and 1 academic institution. The academic institution is the University of Warsaw in Poland. And here you are provided with a list of the associations that have responded and have contributed to the analysis. This year is a slightly revised structure. We have classified the regulatory barriers into 3 different typologies. So ESCO-specific regulation, non-ESCO specific regulation, and frameworks inhibiting ESCO investments. Where in the first edition we had a differentiation between existing regulation and lack of regulation. We tried to harmonize our approach, slightly revised from last year. We had 3 categories when we assessed these regulatory conditions. We identify favorable conditions, and those are those conditions that promote ESCO involvement in the energy efficiency space. That we classify them as barriers if they prevent ESCOs from participating, or unfit if they if there is regulation with the intention to promote energy efficiency or similar, or other aspects not necessarily related to energy efficiency but still have an impact on how ESCOs can do their business. And we try to assess if this regulation is barrier or favorable condition, and sometimes in between we have something that sort of is meant to incentivize certain types of activities, but the regulation is unfit for the purpose of supporting ESCOs. And this analysis actually provides some of the basis for our upcoming policy advice that you will probably all receive a notification when that happens, but we are developing a sort of standard set of policy advice from the Global ESCO network. And more information on this to come, and probably also a webinar in the future. When assessing these barriers, we also ask the associations to rate the relative importance, and we sort of, from the analysis, managed to find a certain set of categories of regulatory conditions important for ESCO market development or for facilitating ESCO project developments. And these are the ones that you can see on the left on this figure. So having a clear ESCO definition, having a clear official ESCO accreditation scheme, the availability of standard ESCO contracts, the importance of having audits with or without implementation arrangements, also the importance of having energy efficiency programs, government-led energy efficiency programs, risk cover and risk sharing facilities, the clear taxation of ESCO services and ESCO models, and having clear rules about taxation, accounting rules as well. Having a system for metering based on, and a framework for not necessarily metering, but basically the charges for energy being based on consumption, the existing of aggregators for ESCO projects like super ESCOs, the relevance of split incentives in the local markets, and then the importance of clear mandates and responsibilities of public institutions when it comes to ESCO project in the public sphere, and also the restrictions for the duration of public contracts. And you can see here in these bars the relative importance rated by the National ESCO Associations that we have consulted. So some stand out. I would say that the existence of government energy efficiency programs, that's quite important. We go through, and I'll go through all of these categories, but this is a representation of what the associations find more important than other things. And then in the documents or in the report, we go through each one of these aspects and sort of analyze, provide examples on barriers in some jurisdictions and enabling environments in others where, when they're available, we try to provide some inputs to how regulatory environments can be made conducive for ESCO project development or ESCO market development, and how these barriers can be overcome. This is not, again, it says here, it's not a ranking, but the overall result of the analysis shows where there is a prevalence of favorable conditions that we have also adjusted to the association's own assessment of their relative importance. So this also provides a sort of visualization of where the national ESCO associations are optimistic, let's say, about the regulatory conditions in their jurisdiction. And here, let's say the Philippines really stand out. In Europe, we have Germany, the Czech Republic. We have then Chile. In Latin America, we only have 2 countries, of course, so it doesn't really provide a good basis for comparison, but it sort of gives an idea of where there are good regulatory conditions. So going through each of the categories presented, I think, well, the first one is to have a fit-for-purpose ESCO definition, which we see as relevant. The table to the left present the results of the analysis, but basically this barrier is about the fact that since ESCO is, well, there is no general universal agreed upon definitions of ESCOs, and it's not a protected term. So in some markets, there is an uncertainty of what an ESCO really constitutes. and in some cases, this uncertainty about what is an ESCO and what is not, and is meter installer, and that is a meter installer an ESCO or not, and this unclarity can create a sort of lack of trust in the capabilities and capacities of the companies that present themselves as ESCOs. This is also related to the accreditation system, which we will come back to. But what we see is that not having a definition leads to a tendency of companies that are labeled as ESCOs to be regular installers of certain technologies with no necessarily experience in energy performance contracting, companies that don't necessarily take on a sort of partial risk about the implementation and performance of the activities, that sometimes lead to overestimations of potential savings and the use of suboptimal solutions for energy efficiency, not based on trying to maximize the energy savings, but based on promoting a certain type of technology or components. And we believe that the essence lies in the savings aspects of the performance risk taken by the ESCOs. So the risk element is a central aspect of ESCOs, and we also provides a proposed definition for ESCOs. So a legal entity that delivers energy services and energy efficiency improvement measures in a user's facilities, premises, and operations, and accepts some degree of financial risk in so doing. Further on, that the services and improvement measures that are implemented are based upon an holistic analysis of the user energy and resource demands. And here also focus on resource, because it's not only energy we're talking about, it can be water or other aspects. But then this against financially and technically viable alternative energy and resource efficient, low carbon technologies and or energy management systems. So not only technologies, but also looking at resources and looking at energy management. And finally, that the payment of the services delivered is based either wholly or in parts on the measured and verified achievement of energy efficiency improvements and of any other agreed performance criteria. So I hope that some stakeholders out there can be inspired by this definition, and potentially we will see some of these jurisdictions that don't have one potentially apply this one. Then the second regulatory condition that was identified through the interaction with the associations, both from this round and the previous round, is ESCO accreditation. This was also part of the last year analysis. So, well, having first of all an agreed upon definition is a prerequisite for accreditation, because you need to accredit against certain criteria. But what the accreditation basically does relates to the trust that I mentioned earlier, and basically enhance professionalism and building trust in the ESCO companies. Ideally, ESCO accreditation would include a registry where the clients or potential clients can access information on the ESCOs and also provide feedback on performance. And this feedback also has a potential of sort of weeding out non-performing ESCOs or raising concerns, which again is a sort of incentive for high performance. But of course, having these recurrent accreditation and maintaining registries also requires constant input of resources to function. And the publication also provides a set of accreditation criteria. I'll not go through all of them now. You can and will have time to go through the publication if so wish, just to mention the overall criteria. So basically, it's important to have look at the business criteria. How long has the business been in operation? The projects, the staff, which references he has the projects that are implemented, also then the financial strength of the businesses, of the ESCOs, and then their technical capacity. So which technologies do they have the ability to implement and maintain? Do they have also, from a MRV perspective, the competencies in-house to guarantee that the performance is properly documented? And then when we have registries, there are different implementation modalities for accreditation that can allow different types of ESCOs and different type of ESCO companies' maturity in the market to participate, so as to not keep potential future ESCOs out of the ESCO markets. Then we identified the existence of ESCO model contracts as an important aspect for many of the ESCO associations, and model contracts might not sound important, but actually, I mean, energy performance contracting, the contract part is the core of the ESCO business model. And also recognizing that ESCO implementation modalities are usually more complex than regular works and regular contracts. Having model contracts, we see, can avoid recurrent drafting and negotiations of new legal agreements, lowering transaction costs. Having some sort of pre-vetted and approved model contracts also create trust among the parties that the deal that they enter into is balanced. But we also get responses from ESCO Association highlighting that some of the standard ESCO contracts are not tailored to the ESCO business model necessarily in all jurisdictions. Sometimes they can be overly complex, basically not effectively lowering the transaction costs. Sometimes they have embedded some uneven risk sharing, at least from the perspective of the ESCO associations and ESCOs. And we actually, our previous webinar was about ESCO model contracts and how they can be designed. We also have just recently established in our library on our website a library of ESCO model contracts that are, to our knowledge, out there and publicly available. If you have others that are not there, you're more than welcome to reach out and inform us of this, and we will provide it in the library as well. But we also, during the same webinar, had important contributions from NRSAFE Capital, where they also presented on the opportunity of securitization of future receivables or future cash flows from the energy savings through the standardization of ESCO model contracts, and how this could be used to sort of group the future receivables into green bonds that can basically be traded, and allowing ESCOs to liberate more capital for future project development. So if you're interested in this topic and how ESCO model contracts can contribute to this, you're more than welcome to revisit our last webinar. This is just an illustration of the concept I just presented, that basically having these contracts with the main contract body and flexible parts, but where the sort of non-flexible parts are set in stone and agreed upon by the relevant stakeholders, can be a useful tool to aggregate the cash flows into receivables that are securitized and then sold off as bonds to institutional and individual investors. Then we go into the aspects of ESCO aggregator schemes, or what is usually referred to as super ESCOs. Sometimes they take on different names, but what super ESCOs basically do is that, first of all, they can organize the process of public procurement if they're public super ESCOs, and they reduce fragmentation, can contribute to achieving economies of scales. In many instances, they also organize the financing for the interventions run by the super ESCO, so making ESCOs able to access finance, sometimes at lower costs, and they're usually public, but there are also some private sector-led ESCO initiatives like Sofiac in Canada and Clearmergy in the Philippines. Then going on to non-ESCO specific frameworks, we have identified the existence of energy audits as a tool for energy efficiency implementation, and mandated energy audit as one of the important regulatory conditions, but unfortunately where many of the jurisdictions or countries, they are not there or are deemed unfit for stimulating ESCO participation in the market. And yes, well, basically energy audits are the tool that analyzes the energy consumptions and can propose implementation measures to reduce energy consumption. And we see this as an effective tool to identify potential ESCO projects and create a line of projects for ESCO companies. We see that mandatory audits, when they are there, they usually don't come with mandatory implementation or offer an implementation model. So you might have the results, but facility owners or tenants might not have the necessary incentive or priority to enter into implementation. But at least providing ESCOs as an implementation model, or in some cases mandating some implementation, we think can be an effective tool to really boost up the demand for ESCO services. But there are some challenges, of course. Audit schemes require trained auditors and cannot be established overnight, at least not mandatory schemes. If you have a broad potential set of audits that you need to implement, so you can consider having a build-up. So while you train auditors, you also increase or decrease the thresholds for when facilities or businesses need to do audits. Then charges based on consumptions. Basically, having a user of a facility, tenant, owner, or basically a potential client, feeling the weight of the energy consumption is a prerequisite to create an incentive for energy efficiency. And there are some examples where metering of energy consumption is not always in place for end consumers, which really inhibits the demand side of energy efficiency implementation. But we also see that charges on consumption, when it's based on consumptions, is usually a mix of fixed and consumption-based charges. So there are some fees, some taxes, etc., that needs to be paid alongside the consumption. And one of the outcomes of the analysis is that shifting the charges towards consumption rather than the fixed fees creates an incentive for energy efficiency and should be considered and can be part of policy advice that is provided at national level in case where this is relevant. Then there is a split, not very much unfit, but a clear difference between enabling environments, let's say, or a clear delineation of roles and responsibilities and mandates in the public sector. So jurisdiction where that is the case, jurisdiction where that is not the case. So there are some associations that report back that the public entity with a mandate for energy efficiency, for example, is not the one responsible for public buildings. And then this unclear delineation without a clear guidance on who has the responsibility for doing what makes implementation of the measures unclear, and things don't move ahead. In some cases, the entity responsible for the public buildings don't necessarily have control over the budget, so they cannot access the funds to do renovation and energy efficiency improvements. In some other cases, the entity paying the energy bills has no mandate to implement energy efficiency measures. And in other cases, there is a reporting that when energy efficiency measures are implemented, having an impact on the budgets, that leads to less budget allocation in the future, which basically leaves out the incentive of implementing energy efficiency measures. And here again, we can see that some of these enabling environments or enabling regulatory environments are connected. So a solution is, of course, if you have mandatory audits with mandatory implementation, you have mandated, and then it's just about the enforcement mechanism for it. But there is also the case of Switzerland, where there is a provision for sharing the cost of energy performance contracting between building owners and tenants. Also, for the public sector, this could be a useful way to look at the regulation and see if similar arrangements could be implemented. Then, public procurement and contract duration. In some jurisdictions, there is basically inability and in some cases unwillingness to enter into long-term contracts that might be dependent on just how things are done. In some jurisdiction, there is reluctance to enter into agreements beyond election terms. In others, is mandated or steered by annual budgets. And in other jurisdictions, there is actually predefined maximum length of duration of public contracts in the legislation. And we can see that, at least from the association we've been in contact with so far, it can range between 2 and 10 years. In some jurisdictions, also longer than 10 years, with some add-on features to that, let's say, but the standard is up to 10 years. And with this range, you can think of what type of ESCO projects would then be possible to implement with a 2-year restriction compared to a 10-year restriction. So looking at the length of public procurements and doing something about it could promote ESCO contracts in the public space. And also, again, relating to another environment, having a super ESCO structuring the whole process could be a potential solution, taking away the burden of having to enter into long-term contracts from entities that are not necessarily very familiar with ESCOs and energy performance contracting. Then the existence of energy efficiency programs, which was rated as one of the most important for the ESCO associations. We see that energy efficiency programs are important, but we also see many of these energy efficiency programs are not necessarily cost effective. Most of them are grant-based program, which basically are expensive for the government. Some of the barriers mentioned is that they are usually not permanent. So, and what that leads to is that it sends stop and go signals to the market, and ESCOs and others, utility, facility owners, etc., wait for new energy efficiency programs to come around, or I've heard that some is around the corner. So basically delaying the implementation of energy efficiency projects. In some cases, the energy efficiency program straight out exclude third parties or ESCOs from accessing the finance. In some cases, it's still possible for ESCOs to do so, but they need to circumvene the regulation and get access to the grant through the facility owner. In some cases, the energy efficiency programs are technology specific, what we refer to as cherry picking, which prevents well, not prevents, but does not incentivize a system-based approach and in the end, maximizing energy efficiency potentials. I propose here to move away from grants towards financing schemes and looking at other opportunities, some as the creation of revolving funds, energy efficiency or green credit lines and guarantees and other approaches. And here, just to provide one example, I think due to time, I'll skip it. It's in the publication with more information. You can read about it. But an example of a fund to support energy efficiency. Then we see that in most cases, there are no facilities to alleviate payment and performance risks. We see that banks are reluctant to accept assets in a facility with a different owner than the ESCOs as collateral. So ESCOs have a difficulty in accessing finance to implement projects. And here the publication proposes guarantee schemes and credit and risk guarantees to financing institutions to overcome this barrier. And also the securitization example mentioned earlier and Clemergy, which is basically a similar approach, not based on the model contract, but basically they also invest in project assets outside of the balance sheets of the ESCOs and the customer and take on the payment risk. Then on accounting and taxation rules, there are some jurisdictions where there are some issues about accounting and taxation rules that prevent ESCOs or not necessarily prevent, but make an uneven playing field for ESCOs compared to other types of interventions. Like in Spain, that's VAT for energy supply is set to 5%, but it's 21% for services. So ESCOs would fall within that. This is only for the residential sector specifically. Or on and off balance sheet rules, where ESCO project finance must be considered on balance sheets for the companies or client in Mexico and Korea. So basically, it's important to ideally support, but as a minimum, not treat ESCOs differently and not disincentivize energy performance contracting to taxation and accounting rules. So to round off, in these three categories of ESCO-specific, non-ESCO-specific, and financial regulatory environments, we see the following typologies as important. This is just to have a quick snapshot of what you get out of reading the publication. So an initial idea on how these enabling regulatory environments can be created. Now we're so lucky to have Timothy Unruh, the Executive Director of NIESCO in the United States, to present on regulatory barriers and the roles of ESCO associations to overcome these. So Dr. Timothy is the Executive Director, and he manages the representation of its member energy service companies, so the ESCOs, and it provides, basically the association provides advocacy for the industry at the federal, state, and local level, so insights at different levels, which I think is very useful to have in this context and the context of the presentation. And also provides for member company accreditation. So another aspect of the enabling environments that we have talked about. It has prior experience from different institutions. He was the Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Renewable Power at the Renewable Power at the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office in the U.S. Department of Energy. And here, as Deputy Secretary, he managed the nation's renewable power research while also providing oversight to the grid modernization initiative. So beyond energy efficiency and also more into the whole energy sector as well. But without further ado, thank you very much, Tim, for joining this webinar. Thank you very much for your feedback on regulatory barriers and also in assisting the development of policy advice that will be launched in the future. And thanks for joining. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Federico. It's a very fascinating presentation you gave, and a lot of the things you talk about, I'm going to give examples of kind of a manifestation of some of the problems that we see in our regulatory barriers in the United States. Let's get on with this so we don't run out of time today. For the U.S., I consider a regulatory barrier just anything that kind of happens in the government created, government led effort that hampers ESCO work. Generally it'd be something that hits many different projects or ESCOs at the same time. And so I've got a picture of a brick wall there, and I thought that particular picture was characteristic. If you look at that picture, there's a lot of characteristics that are shown. Some of the bricks look like they don't have any moss at all, and they look fairly new. And those are places where we got ESCO work just happening like you wouldn't believe it. Some of them are pretty obscured and pretty dark, and those places ESCO work might be pretty well hampered. And in some places, it's partially covered, and there's some stuff that's a problem and some that's not. And in those cases, those are the places where we have probably most of our work, where there's kind of a problem that's kind of there, kind of not, and sometimes it affects things and sometimes not. It can come from legislation, from elected officials. One of the challenges is we have a mature market in the United States. NAESCO is celebrating its 40th year this year, but the market existed even before NAESCO. So we're over 40 years old in the U.S. When the legislation first came into for the market, nobody knew what ESCO work was. Nobody knew what savings performance contracts were. And so legislation kind of just sailed in and got put in place. There was a lot of work behind it. I don't want to diminish that, but it got put in place without much opposition. Today, we're a $7 to $10 billion industry in the United States. And so when you open up the legislation or you come in and you start to touch the legislation, there's a lot of people out there who don't want that legislation to exist because it's taking some of their business away. And so we run into a lot of opposition whenever we talk about legislation. So a lot of times we don't want to touch our legislation. We want to find another way to solve the problem. But we have problems with rules created by administrative personnel. We can see reinterpretations of law. That law might have an interpretation that stood for 20 years, and then a new attorney comes in and looks at it and says, I believe it says this, and changes the interpretation. We get different processes and procedures that get in place. So sometimes a program within a government will be thrown out and a new program will be put in place, and that new program just doesn't work as well or has challenges. There's weird things that come in the market, like requirements for insurance that sometimes don't exist. And a lot of times hazardous materials can hamper our work because in the U.S., we don't want to take possession of a hazardous material if we don't have to. And then we have the challenges. There's all these barriers that can happen across a government entity, but then those barriers can happen across different markets. So we've got a federal market that has its own set of problems, a state market that has its own set of problems, a local, county, city, a university market, and an elementary through high school market that could all have unique issues that arise with the performance contracting and ESCO work that happens there. So I thought I'd kind of go back some of the past barriers that we have. Our first barrier was there was no supporting legislation. So back in the beginning, you had some people doing some ESCO work where savings was funding the project and so forth, but it wasn't really clear and it wasn't something that you could really count on happening. The way we look at things in the U.S. is we say, like the private sector says, that a law generally has to be in place to enable something to happen. But in the private sector, we say that laws are typically ban something. So if the law is silent on something, it means you can go ahead and do it. And so some jurisdictions would go ahead with performance contracting, but some would not because they just didn't feel like they were empowered from the government side to really make things happen. And in the U.S., probably 90% of our ESCO work is happening in the public sector with government buildings. And that's a key difference to a lot of the places in the world. That's where our market is at. And so we have a solution to that barrier, and that's to create enabling legislation. I go back and look at the old minutes of NAESCO back in the beginning, and there's a lot of discussion about here we're going to have to go after this state and change this legislation here. For a lot of partnerships, a lot of effort. You've got to work in 50 different states in the United States, plus in territories. Then you have also the federal government. And in all those cases, effectively, these initial founders of the industry went in and worked with legislation, wrote it, got it put in place, and enacted it. But it does mean that we have 50 different states with 50 different versions of how the legislation works. And in some states, the legislation covers state buildings differently than it covers city and county buildings, than it covers K through 12 buildings. And so you have a whole different way that the ESCO legislation has been put into place. The benefits, though, is the ESCO market, now that we have established law in all the states, They have the ability to develop divisions and have focuses and develop marketing campaigns, sales campaigns, and have a regular expectation of business in an area. Financing has become available because it's legal and it's available, and we see market growth from that. So our barrier number two is lack of standard contracts. So this has been something that comes and goes in the United States. We've had standard contracts for well over a decade in the United States, probably close to almost 20 years now. And those standard contracts are ushered by the U.S. Department of Energy. They're also supported by what's called the Energy Services Coalition in the United States. And these standard contracts are really needed because you need to have some function in order to enter into a contract. There was a mention that Federico said that the contracts can be complicated. Well, when you're doing a savings project that involves the project development, savings, ongoing performance period, all those different things, it does tend to be a little bit more of a complicated contract. And so from a state, local entity, a government official, you want to know that there's a contract that covers A through Z, everything I need to have, so they don't forget something, because there's a lot of things you want to make sure that you have taken care of. One of the things that standard contracts help us to do is to try to create a common set of language or terms that we talk about when we talk about these. I know Federico talked about the term for an ESCO. I'm going to go beyond that. The term for an audit, the term for the contract, what is it called? The term for an energy conservation measure. What do people call these things? And even now in the U.S., there are various terms used for these things, but they've narrowed down to where there's a fairly consistent understanding in a dialogue between an owner and an ESCO of what exactly you're talking about. The barrier solved is we have model documents. We're in the process right now of working with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab out in California to create yet another version of the model documents reflecting changes in the market that we see happen. So we're getting better and better as we go forward. This is probably about our third iteration of standard contracts, working with the U.S. Department of Energy, the Energy Service Coalition, and there's another organization called NASEO, the National Association of State Energy Officials, that also works with us to create these standard contracts. The challenge with a standard contract is if you go across all the country and look at the contracts you're using, it doesn't look like there's a standard contract, because all the states have different contracts, because each state may take bits and pieces of what they feel is important in that contract, put it into their version, add their own attorneys' views of what they need to have. So eventually you wind up with still many different contracts. But a standard contract, even though it's not used verbatim, still provides structure and guidance to the market to help it mature and move along. The benefit, even though the contract's not adopted wholeheartedly, some ideas are used, and it helps to standardize the general process. We all kind of understand now the process we go through to develop a project, what's expected of developing a project, what the owner wants to have, schedules, performance period, training, ongoing services, and so forth is clear and understood. So another barrier is trust in the ESCO delivery model. So you get the initial days. The legislation is sort of there. There's some legislation, there's not. And so you've got effectively what we'll call the Wild West of ESCO world. People are kind of doing what they want to do. Owners are buying this through a trust mechanism, but you don't necessarily have a consistent model. It's more than likely that there may be some players that either purposely don't deliver what they say they're going to deliver, or maybe accidentally don't deliver what they say they're going to deliver. Or I'll even say third is close to accidentally, they don't understand what they said they were going to deliver, and the owner has a misunderstanding of what they thought they were going to get. And so you wind up with stories that I call the elusive bad project. And so the elusive bad project continues to haunt us even to today. I've been in meetings where someone will talk about a project that happened 20 or 30 years ago, and they don't necessarily know what the project was about, where it was at, or who did it. All they know, it was a bad project, and because that happened, that they heard about it from their friend of a friend's cousin's, uncle's, aunt's niece, that maybe they should not do a project either. And so that stymies the development of the process, and it won't go forth. And that is not really a regulatory barrier, but more often than not, those stories are shared amongst government officials, and so it becomes a regulatory barrier. And so that trust in the ESCO delivery model begins to erode. And so the solution is we believe, is ESCO accreditation. And we've had an accreditation scheme now, I think, for over 20 years. I don't know exactly when it started. It was before my time with the organization. But we do a strong ESCO accreditation system. It requires, it has an independent committee that develops the rules and enforces the accreditation scheme. Accreditation is for an existing ESCO to be reaccredited. They can get it for 3 years. New ESCOs can get it for 2 years. It provides a validation, some assurance to an owner that there's consistency and follow through with projects. One of the things about ESCO business that's unique in the business is ESCO work is sold based on a relationship, and it's based on past performance. So as an owner, you're buying something that you can't necessarily bid because the audit has to be done, and then from the audit, the project is developed. And so when you're making a selection of who's going to do that initial work, you don't necessarily have the ability to bid the work because the scope isn't defined. And so the structure of selecting becomes something based on past references and based on a trust relationship, and accreditation helps to establish that trust. But the ESCO accreditation is also bolstered by the fact that relationships matter and those past reviews are important. So the ESCOs need to maintain accreditation, but they need to maintain past project performance to ensure that those references going forward help them win the next job. Also within our accreditation, we maintain an ethics policy that all accredited ESCOs have to agree to in order to maintain accreditation. The benefits of that accreditation is we've gotten growth in the ESCO market. We still have the stories of the bad projects, and we still have things happen where there's a disagreement between owners and ESCOs, but we still have a way to manage through those with accreditation. Many customers in the US require accreditation to participate in RFPs now. And ESCOs perform work that recognizes that the quality of performance is required to maintain accreditation. In other words, they have to maintain clients for the entire duration because our contracts are long. We do contracts 15, 20, 25 years. That's a long time to maintain a good relationship. And so that's what ESCOs have to do to manage that accreditation and that trust and delivery model. So barrier 4 is legislative reinterpretation. So this is one that's a little odd. So you have a law that may be long standing on the books. So we have a state right now that has been doing ESCO work for probably 20 years. And they have a new attorney, and that attorney has decided that the legislation that supports ESCO work is unconstitutional. So they believe that it no longer is valid. And so what's happened is in that state, you've hit that brick wall and you've stopped because one attorney that came in says it's not allowed. We have other cases where we have long-standing legislation in place and processes in place, and then someone determines that a certain type of savings is no longer valid. The most common case is demand savings. So in the US, we have a kilowatt hour charge for the use and a demand charge for the maximum use. Well, demand savings isn't really an energy savings, it's a cost savings. And so someone will say, the law says it's for energy savings, not cost savings, and so therefore demand savings aren't valid. In some projects, demand savings can be the major savings piece that derives a project, and therefore that could stop many projects. And then some say that the procurement methodology is not right. And so because of the strange procurement methodology where ESCOs in the US are selected based on a relationship and past performance and can't really do a price bid because there's no scope, some will come in and challenge that procurement methodology and say that that's invalid. You can only buy things by doing a low bid scope. Some cases, existing legislation is challenged by industries that are opposed to ESCO work. I alluded to this on my first slide. So we may have a law in place that enables ESCO work to happen very fluidly. But let's say that maybe there's an architecture group or an engineering group or maybe a union group or maybe it's a certain contractor group that thinks that they're not getting as much work as they should because the ESCO might be doing some of that work. They might come in and oppose that. And in some cases, they could have very strong lobbying ability. They might have deep pockets and be able to fund legislative people in their campaigns and help them make a decision that they support maybe one side versus the other. Some cases, there's a local issue where local contractors don't feel they're getting their fair share of the work. So sometimes when an ESCO comes in and does the work, they might bring a contractor from out of area in to do the project, and the local contractors might not like that, and therefore raise a problem with the local authorities that they're missing out on work. We could also get an elected official that overly scrutinizes the program. And I know that we had a state one time where one of the elected officials in that state was a contractor themselves and didn't like ESCOs taking business from them. And so he launched investigations into the ESCO program. And it's kind of like in a tax audit. If you look deep enough and long enough, you'll eventually find somebody did something wrong somewhere, somehow. And so you use that excuse and then freeze the program, challenge the program, and cause restructuring, which slows things down and probably stymies the market somewhat. So some barrier examples that we had. A law passed over 10 years ago is being reread and new rules being applied in a state. One agency took over a site from another agency. The attorneys for the new agency examined the contract for work and determined the existing contract for a project that was 100% built already was no longer legal, making them take stuff out. A legislator prompted by interest groups in their state proposes legislation that would stop all ESCO work in the state. A state has an approved ESCO list that are allowed to do work in the state. It's a common procurement method in the United States. There's a list of approved companies to work in a state, and then agencies in that state pick from that list. Well, in this case, the administrators that run the program that pick the list have failed to renew the list and just haven't gotten around to renewing it, and maybe think that they don't have time to do it anymore. And so the ESCO work gets hampered because of that. We have a place where a state employee doesn't believe that projects should be financed, a personal belief that they have. And that employee happens to be a reviewer of all proposed projects to build or construct. And so that reviewer now slows down the review, adds additional challenges with detailed questions, and asks for changes and so forth that cause the ESCO market to slow down, stifle, or even lose money. So what does an ESCO do? You have all these problems in place. We're a trade association. We're supposed to go out and help fix these things and make them not happen, right? So what do? First, we learn about the issue. We have to get that information from our members. We're only 4 people in ESCO. We don't have eyes and ears across the entire country. And so we depend on our members to communicate with us. And that includes having a good relationship all the way through organizations. So we work hard to keep that relationship. We do regional meetings, and we create personal relationship with ESCO personnel so they ease that transition, because sometimes they're not sure if they should tell us. They might feel foolish telling us. We want to make sure that we want to hear about all the issues so we can make sure to address them. Second, once we hear about an issue, we've got to react to the issue. It may involve training. Maybe the state and local employees just don't understand the legislation, so we can help them understand the legislation. Maybe we need to have a relationship and just start talking so that they can ease their concerns. Sometimes we have our members communicate with government officials. Sometimes we hire a lobbyist to help represent ESCOs as a group. Sometimes we actually do propose legislation to fix a problem. We had legislation proposed just a year ago in Texas to fix a problem. Sometimes we engage with other trade groups that may not understand ESCO work, and we help to understand how it can benefit their cause as well as ours. And then the third thing is we have to get ahead of the issue. Everything often tends to be reactionary. We also want to be proactive. Proactive is hard, and it's marketing promotion. It's outreach. It's regular lobbying advocacy. So making sure that your lobbyists are communicating with a certain set of elected officials, saying the positive things, making sure they understand the great things that are happening. Maintaining relationships, be present in other efficiency organizations is very important. Energy efficiency organizations run rampant in the United States. They're all over the place. They all have their own focus, their own mission. They all do great work, but we need to be present and help them with their mission, because then they turn around and understand our mission. So we want to form alliances with those affected by ESCO work. Maybe that's the engineers or the architects or the trade unions. And then we also finally provide training. We want to make sure we get the message out about how this all works. And Federico, with that, I think I'll turn it back over to you to run some Q&A time.
Well, thank you very, very, very much, Tim. I think we all got a lot of information in a very short time about the barriers and the great work that NIESCO does to overcome these barriers. I learned a lot of new aspects and managed to also make connections to the publication and to the analysis that we have done, but giving some concrete examples. So thank you very much for that, Tim. I will not praise you more because there are some questions that we have received that I'd like to ask, and actually they're mostly to you. I think one I can answer with some of the aspects that were presented in the presentation. So I'll take that first. Then when that is out of the way, I'll leave the rest to you.
Great.
This one is very generic. And what is the most important piece of regulation? From the analysis that we have done, and it doesn't represent all the associations, is only addressing associations and their views, we saw that government's energy efficiency programs is the most important when assessing the relative importance. And I don't know if you have anything to add there, Tim, if it's at all possible to respond to that question.
Well, I think for us, having enabling legislation is the single most regulatory thing that impacts our markets. And then following that, you're dead on. Once you have the enabling legislation, so once you've got the road paved, then you've got to have some rules that say go down this road. And that's the rules of the efficiency programs that make things happen. I think you're absolutely right, Federico.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'll take the next one. So what are the drivers for change in the markets? Basically, what regulatory changes do you think are important, and what changes need to be done in the way we do contracting? It's sort of vague, but yeah.
No, I think I understand it. So, what are the changes that impact this? So, for us, we found that leadership is a big driver. So, a lot of times in a government, there can be a mandate that says you're going to save this amount of money, and government employees. Let's face it. I don't know how it is in everywhere else in the world, but in the U.S., government employees probably have this much time to do this much work, and so the problem is that one more mandate on top is just one more pile on the things that may not get done. But when you have leadership that says this is important, we want to make sure that our buildings are efficient, we want to lower our greenhouse gas reductions, and we would like you to report to me regularly on your progress on making that happen, it puts a priority in place. You see that often causes change across government, is a leadership taking an interest, asking for accountability. And that has a lot to do with it. But when you talk about the secondary portion of the question was market changes and what changes in the market, that's very interesting. So if you think about the history of the ESCO market, we originally were a very technology-driven market. New efficient lighting came out and drove a whole lot of things happening. And then all of a sudden we got DDC controls came out. We saw a lot of things happening there, and VFDs came out. And then we saw chillers and boilers becoming much more efficient and rooftop units becoming much more efficient. But today, we really are seeing, I think, kind of a plateauing in energy efficiency and technology-wise. There are some things in some building envelopes and pretty neat things, but sometimes they're a little limited in their application across a broad set of buildings. Today, we're seeing innovation and market-driven in contract structure and financing methodology. And that is driving what we call the energy as a service market, where we start to see more and more projects coming in that are more comprehensive and more capital intensive, but also provide a more intensive relationship between the owner and the ESCO.
Well, thank you very much. And now, thanks to your answer, I think I also understood the question better. And actually, if I may just jump in with a follow-up question, because we talked about energy efficiency, but ESCOs and some of the association has pointed this out, are also seeing changes in the market in terms of combining more, and you sort of pointed towards it, but more holistic systemic approaches where you might start only looking at energy efficiency, but that in combination with renewable energy installations, maybe even with EV charging. That's right. Are you seeing the same in the US?
Yeah, we are. We're seeing that almost all ESCO projects, well, almost all projects have some sort of renewable piece to them. It may be a small demonstration-like project, or it could be a full-scale solar farm to develop that. EV charging infrastructure has become a big part of ESCO work. We had a webinar on EV charging just a few months ago to show our members. And the other things that are happening is in addition to those technologies, we also see things like resiliency coming in. We see electrification, decarbonization coming in as requests from owners. and sustainability comes in as a piece, and those are all related to energy efficiency, but yet have a unique aspect in their own stance that stand alone.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I yeah, I hadn't talked about the resilience, but yes, of course, that is also more and more on the agenda, especially looking at from we're based in Copenhagen, especially from a European perspective. I think that can also be something that we'll see more of in the future.
So there was a story today in my news feed about questions in the U.S. about LEED certified buildings and their ability to withstand flooding. So apparently, it's a small criteria when they developed the LEED certification for flooding. I think they said like 4 points out of 110 points, and now they want more focus on flooding, and so LEED then is going to have to re-update their standard, which they say will be like 2025. They'll do that. So yeah, that's a resiliency measure. How well do you protect against flooding?
And if I may move over to on the next question, does NIESCO work with financial institutions, and are you working also with government guarantee funds?
So we do work with financial institutions. We have several financial institutions that are members of NIESCO. I did a special special presentation live for my members in June of this year, where I brought 3 financial companies together, and they talked about the changes financially we see in the market. So we work very closely with financial. And so we don't work much with government loan funds. There's been a big, significant fund advance in the our Department of Energy's loan program office. There's potential of working with them, but we haven't really engaged much with that yet. Because there's so much private loan money available, it makes it more challenging to justify working with government loan money when private money is out there. And we have several members that represent that private money.
Okay, well, I think that clearly answered the question. There is something about, I think you touched upon it in your presentation, but maybe they're just looking for more details. And it's about the ESCO Association, so NIESCO's process to revise, change, or introduce new laws or regulation. Maybe some more details about it. How do you go about it? You mentioned training for government officials in your presentation, but I mean, how do you build up these relationships, maybe, and how do you go about it?
Well, I wish there was a standard process to it that I could say, step 1, you do this, step 2, you do this. It's not. So for us as a trade association, and we're a membership-led organization, our first mission is to determine what do our members want to do. And that may require some education of them to understand if there's an issue, how big the issue is it worth coming in and looking at legislation? Now, as I said, we always face the challenge. If we want to go talk about changing legislation, once you crack open the door to altering your legislation, you might be surprised who sticks their foot in that door to hold it open. And it may not be somebody that you want there. And you can't ever control that or predict that. And so for us, our challenges are around getting our memberships to coalesce around what they want to do with legislation. Then we would hire a lobbyist, someone who has expertise in dealing with the government group that we feel we have to deal with. They would help us understand the landscape, what the potential is. Then we potentially write legislation, begin to introduce it, and support it going forward. We're in the process of developing that now to develop energy as a service legislation across the country.
Okay, well, not the standardized approach, but some good pointers on what you can do. And I think actually we reached a final question, and it's quite specific, I would say. So, are the ESCOs from outside the US servicing the public sector, and do they need to be accredited in the US?
So if you're an ESCO from outside the US serving the public sector, I don't know if there are those. There probably are. We have a few non-US members of NIESCO, but they aren't ESCOs. If they come into the US, they do not have to be certified in the US. Generally in the US, there's lists that you get on. For the federal government, there's a list they just awarded that's usually for 5 to 7 years. Most states have a list that they re-up every few years. And so you'd want to investigate where in the US you want to develop your market and begin working to understand the timeframes to get on those lists. Sometimes procurements require accreditation, and sometimes they don't.
Okay, so maybe an invitation to visit the specific
if you're
jurisdictions
outside the U.S. and you're interested in coming to the U.S., contact me at NESCO and we'll talk about what you want to do.
That was going to be my next point. Reach out to ESCO and become a member, and and you'll get the support you need. Well, I think with that we have reached our termination. We're actually more than 6 minutes beyond our planned schedule, but there were questions, so we like to address them. So thank you to all the listeners, to your interest and for staying with us until now. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for participating. Sign up for our next webinars. And thank you most of all to Tim for your great contribution and sort of taking this more overall topics that we presented and giving them context in your own jurisdiction. So thank you again, and continued good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are. Thanks for joining and listening.